In honor of the veterans who have served our country, both past and present, First National Bank proudly sponsors Veterans of the Valley. Since 1862, First National has provided local decision-making and accessibility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens. First National Bank, first, always.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. You call, we haul. That was the motto of Boat Pool 15 that roamed the islands of the Pacific. Fred Holland of the Brazos Valley was a coxswain and motor mechanic aboard the 50-foot LCM that placed our forces on the beaches to fight the Japanese during World War II. Now, landing crafts are perhaps best known for transporting troops and tanks to the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, but they were indeed a critical vessel in the Pacific, and Fred Holland is proud to tell us about them. Fred, thanks for being here, and thank you for your service, and what great stories that you have to tell. I wish we had time to tell them all, but let's talk about you getting into the service. I know that you were born in Childress, you were raised in Quanah, Texas, and you wanted to be in the Air Force, but you were drafted in the Navy. Sort of talk about how that all came about, and it ended up that the Navy and the Marines kind of fought over you. Talk about that.
Well, I was off the farm. And I didn't finish my high school education because in the fall of the year, we went to the cotton fields and pulled cotton.
Right.
And so I missed part of my high school education during that, and that always set me back a little bit. But I didn't have my high school diploma, so I was trying to get into the Air Force, and had gone to Wichita Falls, Shepherd Field, and volunteered, hoping I could make it on my aptitude test. But before I could hear from them, I got my draft notice, which I knew was going to be the walking army, the infantry no less. And I had to go to Lubbock for my physical. And when I came out of the physical, and I was because of working in the fields, and I'd never been in a hospital a day in my life or anything. The first needle I had was the needle they stuck in my arm at the courthouse when they called me up to take a blood sample, which I didn't like and still don't like. But got to Lubbock, came out at the end of that physical, and there was a soldier, sailor, and a Marine lined up, and my medical records was following up the line, and they past the soldier, just glanced at it, pushed it to the Navy, and the Navy said, we'll take him, and pushed the maggot on up to the Marine, which is at the end of the line, and the Marine said, no, you don't get this one, he's a Marine. And so I sat there thinking I'm the victim of a practical joke. And so we stood there for maybe 30 seconds or something. Finally, one of the Marines said, well, what's it going to be? I said, you mean I'm getting a choice? Because I just assumed it was the infantry.
Right.
He said, you got to do something. And I said, well, if it's a choice, I want the Navy. And he said, why? He said, what you got against the Marines? I said, not a cotton picking thing, but I don't know one of them. Because all my buddies, my school buddies, are in the Navy. And my chances of serving with one of them would be better in the Navy than it would be with the Marines.
Right.
And he looked at the sailor and he said, well, I'll buy that. And he pushed my record back to the sailor and he stamped it and said, you're in the Navy now. So, long story short, I was drafted into the Navy unexpectedly.
You had another good point that you told me. You talked about when you're an infantryman, when you're in the Army, you're facing an enemy from a foxhole.
Right. And that was one of the things that we had discussed before as school buddies, that don't wait till you're drafted, because if you do, you're going to be facing your enemy from a foxhole, and when he aims, he's shooting at you. And so my buddies had volunteered for the Navy, the ones that had gone in before I did, and said, if you get aboard a ship, well, the enemy's aiming at that ship, not at you. And if he might hit that ship on the bow and you're on the stern. Or he might hit on the stern and you're on the bow, but as long as that ship's afloat, you got a place to eat and sleep. He said, and if you end up in that walking army, you're going to eat and sleep in foxholes, and you're going to be eating sea rations.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot to tell about I know you went to boot camp in San Diego, and then you went to Coronado Island for your amphibious training.
Right.
But you ended up on landing crafts, and people also know it as a Higgins boat.
Yeah.
There's a history about Andrew Higgins and the naming of the boat. But these were the boats that I guess most people see when they see films or history or documentaries.
They don't know what they are.
They see them at Normandy. They
Yeah.
see them landing the beaches at Normandy.
Yeah.
But they really did have a role throughout World War II, especially in the Pacific. Sort of talk about the landing craft and the LCM, which is landing craft mechanical, that you were on.
I was assigned in Coronado Island to an LCM, and we had a three-man crew, a Coxswain, which was a boat handler, a motor mech, or a fireman, first class, or fireman, third class, and a deckhand.
Right.
Well, all of these high-sounding names were simply assignments of duty. We were all seaman third class, regardless of what. We were called a qualified coxswain, seaman third class, qualified fireman, seaman third class, or a deckhand, seaman third class. So there was no rank above anyone else.
Right.
But you were assigned to your duties according to the training we had at Coronado Island, ability to handle the boat and do what. So I ended up as a coxswain aboard LCM, but they mixed my name up with three Hollands in our unit. One from Arkansas, and one from Oklahoma, and then I was from Texas. And Holland RL was the other Holland that ended up on the first draft. We were sent to San Francisco and waited 6 weeks for assignment. And when the first draft came up, they called my deckhand and my fireman, but they didn't call me. They called Holland RL. And the rest of you report back to your barracks. And so they shipped out, and I go back to the officer in charge. I said, well, now this appeared to mix up, because there goes my crew, but I didn't call. Well, he checked it out, and sure enough, it was a mix-up of names. So that took 6 months, as I discussed with you before the show. That took 6 months after I got overseas for my records to catch up to me. But as a result of the mix-up, the next week I caught trying to catch up with my unit. I got assigned to the USAT Seabarb, which is an Army transport. And we traveled across, back then, if you were faster than the fastest submarines, you went solo.
Right.
If you couldn't outrun a submarine, you went troop convoy. So the Seabarb was fast, thank God. And I shipped out of San Francisco December the 11th, 1943, and hit the New Hebrides Islands, Espiritu Santos, December the 24th, 1943. 13 days zigzag course across that Pacific.
That's moving, because that normally takes about a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's further down than Bougainville, getting well on down closer to New Zealand. So anyway, as a result of following up my unit, the receiving station was full when I got there, and they assigned me temporarily to a CB battalion, and that's for 1 month I was assigned to the 44th CB battalion and made good friends with a mess cook.
Right.
And I don't know whether you want to go into that story or not.
Well, you started off building Quonset huts, and that was moving a lot of cement.
Yeah.
That was outside and hot, and
yeah.
nasty work. But you made friends with the
Mess
guy
cook.
in the mess hall, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was making a little, what he called jungle juice out of anything he could confiscate out of the mess hall. And so we were assigned to a tent, 6 men to a tent. And so for the place to sleep, my bunk was with these 5 Seabees. Woodrow Watts from West Virginia. And he came in with a little gallon jug of pouring drinks for the guys in the tent. He said, you want some of this? And I said, what is it? And he said, oh, some stuff I brewed up. I said, well, what's it like? And he said, it's about like a light wine. Well, we go down, to make a long story short, he poured my canteen cup and we drank that stuff. It tasted awful. But it was alcoholic. And he said, you know where the open air theater is? And I said, no. And he said, well, stick around and I'll take you down and get you acquainted with everything. So he took a liking to me. We got down to the theater, and old Woodrow, I looked over at him, and was waiting for it to get dark enough to turn the movie lights on, open air theater. And old Woodrow, I looked over, and his eyes was glued to the center of his nose. And I said, my God, I don't remember that guy was cross-eyed. Before it got dark enough to see that movie, there was 2 screens down there, and they were watering around. You know? And it dawned on me that whatever that was, and it was working on my eyes like his. And So anyway, I made good friends with Woodrow.
No wonder, yeah.
And make a long story short, we were moved up further up the line a year later in the Admiralty Islands, and I offloaded this 44th Seabeard Battalion in our boats to the Admiralty Island group and re-met old Woodrow Watts.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So
the Admiralty Islands, talk about that, because that's where you were assigned, that's where you spent a lot of time. And also there was an event on November the 10th, 1944 involving the USS Mount Hood, which was a boat that was in the harbor with you. You were about 2 miles away from the Mount Hood when there was an explosion. This is a day that you will never forget. Go ahead, take your time and talk about that.
All right, the Mount Hood, Commodore Boak was the commander of the islands, and he broke a cardinal Navy rule that an ammunition ship is never to be within 15 miles of a ship of the fleet. But there were several hundred ships in that harbor at the time because it was during the Philippine campaign, and they were preparing and resupplying troop ships and cruisers, destroyers, battleships, of everything, resupplying for that campaign. So he had the Commodore to had the USS Mount Hood, which was an ammunition ship. He had it moved up into the central part of the harbor to expedite the offloading and supplying the ships of the fleet. Because if you were 15 miles in a boat doing 10 knots, it'd take you all day to take one load to the ship and back. You might get one in the morning and one in the evening. But he moved it in ship closer, you know, hoping against hope that nothing would happen.
Yeah, I want people to get an idea when you say ammunition ship. The USS Mount Hood had some 3,800 tons of ammunition on board. Right. 3,800 tons. So we're talking about a lot of ammunition. Go on.
That amount of ammunition is almost equal to the first atomic explosion. That was the experimental explosion in New Mexico.
Right.
So anyway, my boat had been converted to an ambulance boat at that particular time, and I was at the base hospital picking up a load of convalescents to take back out of the islands to convalescent area, but they had to fly them out at the bomber strip or the seaplane strip. And we had picked up, there were 3 boats that were made into ambulance boats, and we had picked up the first load at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then the other 2 boats had to go on the beach, and ambulances could back up into the boat. We could carry 36 stretcher cases and about 50 walking casualties.
Right.
And they had just standing around and sat on the gunwales of the boat. And so we had swung around and decided that the 3 boat crews, we'd wait for each other and make the run together, since it was not an urgency run. And we tied up to a pontoon barge that was secured to a little earth-filled jetty that had a crane sitting on the dock. And all of a sudden the sky lit up. And the sensation was that the sun rose in the middle of the harbor and exploded. And then all the contrails out of the middle of that, and it lit up the whole harbor. Well, it was, I won't say I was looking straight at it, it's just that the light of the lit up all of a sudden of the flash gets your attention. Immediately you look that way. And that was what I saw, was a gigantic Roman candle burst. And then the fallout of that was from, we were about 2.5 miles roughly, and we were about 100 yards past the fallout of all the ammunition and parts of the ship. The ship itself disintegrated.
Right.
And it sunk 13 other ships, smaller crafts from different vessels of different sizes.
Right.
And I think there was 374 that official count of deaths from that explosion. But the thing that you're not accounting for is the concussion. There were 2 petty officers standing on that pontoon barge, which was an empty barge, and it blowed them down like matchsticks. I mean, they were down. Well, here we are. I'm standing behind the cockpit, and I didn't get the blast from the initial burst of it. But what we weren't accounting for was the tidal wave from the explosion, which was 13, 14 feet high.
Right.
You're looking way up here. And it picks us up and sets us on top of that pontoon barge, set that barge on the dock, knock the crane off the dock, and then we go sliding back into the water. So we ended up back in the water, but the 2 boats on the beach picking up casualties were set high and dry inland. Well, for the next 2.5 hours, we had to offload our casualties that we had already picked up and get everything back to the base hospital because we knew that there was terrible casualties in the middle of the harbor, and that being an ambulance boat, we would be needed in that area.
Right.
But it took 2.5 hours to get there.
Right.
And when we got there, all it was is muddy water from the blast and just pieces of life jackets and
so some of your casualties had actually been knocked off the boat also,
right.
so you had to pick them up again, take them back
to the
and
base
then
hospital.
go look for casualties.
We
from
never
the
got to the
explosion.
seaplane base or our base. Everything went back to the base hospital. So I don't know how many actual casualties we had from the ones, because a bunch of our casualties ended up in the water.
Right.
So I don't know how many actual casualties we had from that. But
Right. History shows now that the explosion, even though I guess for a while the investigation was kept rather under wraps and secret for a long time, but investigations since then show that it was not from attack. It was not a Japanese attack of this explosion, but indeed it was sort of careless handling of ammunition by the people, by the crew on board the Mount Hood, right?
That's what we really, we knew that. Among the crews of the boats, we said, it wasn't, there was rumors that a Japanese plane had flown in and, other things. No, it was careless handling of ammunition. It was something that had to happen. We knew sooner or later was going to happen, just by our experiences.
And that's why you all made it plain that you didn't want to be involved in any detachments to ammunition boats, right?
Right.
Right.
And so we worked ammunition ships by rotation.
Right.
We had 250 boats roughly, I think, in our unit. And so that meant that there were generally seven boats at a time assigned to an ammunition ship.
Right. But you didn't want to hang around them very long.
No, they would be loaded. There were generally 5 holes on the ship. And so they'd have a certain number of boats on each side of the ship being loaded. And they would, as they got loaded, they would head for their designated area.
Well, again, the date was November 10th, 1944, and I can tell people that if you want to know more about that incident, the internet is an amazing thing, and if you just type in a search engine, USS Mount Hood, you'll read plenty about it. I did, and see some photographs. We've got one of those photographs, as a matter of fact, coming up. Let's go ahead and go to some pictures now that Fred Holland has supplied to us. And there is a young sailor, Fred Holland. About how old were you when this picture was taken, do you think?
18 years old.
18 years old. So you were just fresh out of high school and fresh into the Navy, right?
Fresh into the Navy.
There you go. Good-looking sailor.
Well, thank you.
Now, we moved forward a few years because I wanted to put a picture of you and your wife. And you and your wife have been married for 57 years
57
now?
years now.
57 years now. And that's your wife, Johnny Francis.
And Lowell Meeks, the guy, this picture was taken at one of our military reunion in New Orleans?
In 2000.
Lowell Meeks was my deckhand.
I see.
Oh, I could tell you some stories, but I won't have time now with that gentleman, and he lives in Corinth, Mississippi.
So he was your deckhand, and we'll talk later about because you were a Coxswain, and then later a Motor Mac, and then eventually you were both on the LCM. But that you're standing between you is your wife, Johnny Francis. So I wanted to make sure that we got a picture of her, lovely lady. Okay, here is the picture that I found on the internet. This is the explosion of the USS Mount Hood, and you can get an idea of exactly what we're talking about. It's
that's after the initial burst, and that was just the smoke and stuff off from it. The initial burst had already happened a few minutes before.
The plume of smoke went a couple of thousand feet in the air, and that's the initial. That's right after the explosion, and so you can just sort of get an idea. You can almost, just by looking at that picture, you can almost hear what kind of sound it must have been.
This is about 10 miles away.
This picture was taken about 10 miles away.
Yeah.
Wow.
7 to 10 miles.
Right. Amazing. Now here's a picture of the bay there at the Admiralty Islands, and I think this picture was taken after a few hours after the explosion.
A couple of hours after the explosion, and that's the boiling area, and all those little specks you see out there are our boats, and you see 2 little islands here to the Boochiloo and Boochilang.
All right.
And just past those islands, you see a little cluster of boats. That is the boat Pool 15. We were land-based.
Would that be on the upper right part of the picture?
The upper right part of the picture, just past that island. You can see a little cluster of boats back up in there.
Right.
And that's boat Pool 15. But most of the boat Pool 15 is out here.
Right.
In boats picking up. Now you see two more islands. Those were submarine islands. That's where the submarine recreation islands that when the subs came in, and you see a little cove indented.
Yes, sir.
Well, that little indenture was the base hospital, and that's where I was sitting when the ammunition ship. We were up in that cove when that ammunition ship blew up. So
Wow.
from here to there is
Right.
what you can see, and the largest ship to the right, just before you get to this island, was the USS Argonne. That was Admiral Halsey's flagship.
I see.
They lost 30 of their crew that happened to be above deck on the deck side when the
Right.
explosion. So it killed nearly everybody that was above the water line or on the deck of any ships that were close into the harbor.
You can see the debris in the water still. It's
Yeah.
right there in front. So this picture was taken from about the point of the explosion. Is that right? Point
Right.
taken
You see
out?
that where you see that wave? That's the wave. That's nearly 90 feet deep there.
Right.
And so
you
it
sort of
blew
see a
up.
circle sort of in the water.
That circle
there.
is the muddy part of the water that the blast area. The ship was sitting dead center of that.
I see. So
And,
that's right where the blast was.
So they're out there looking for these boats are looking for
Yep.
anything they can rescue out of the water. But there was not that ship disintegrated. There was nothing above when it.
Okay, let's move on. And now I was looking for as good a picture as I could find of the LCM-3, which is the boat that you were a coxswain of. And this is what I found this. This is from a box of a Tallery model kit.
Yeah,
and I thought this was a rather impressive artist rendering of the LCM that you were with.
Yeah. And see, they all had every book. The boats that were assigned for beachhead landing had two 50 caliber machine guns mounted just in front of the cockpit. That's
Right.
what you see up there.
Right.
And
Right.
the cockpit, little square box, is where the coxswain. That's where the boat handler.
Now there's another photograph because your particular craft held Sherman tanks,
Yep.
and that's a
Sherman
rendering of a Sherman tank coming off
They would.
of the craft.
The Navy and the Marines said we need a craft. Back before the Higgins made these boats,
Right.
we need a craft to get our troops on the beach dry-footed,
Right.
and to get the boats on the beach.
So if you want to buy a model of Fred Holland's boat, they are available. And don't mean to be selling models, but I thought that those were great renderings. Okay, let's move on. There is an actual photograph of one of the landing crafts coming onto the beach. I'm not sure where this is from or whether this is from Normandy or the Pacific. It's just a photograph that I found on the internet just to give another idea.
I believe that one is a later model since
Right.
World War II.
Exactly.
Probably Vietnam or that in, because they enlarged it.
Right.
And
Right.
this looks like an enlarged version of it.
Right.
And I'm not familiar with the new stuff.
Right. And then there's another one.
Yeah.
To get you an idea of what we're talking about. You were 2 years was your service in World War II aboard this. Talk a little bit more about your experiences. I know that you said that I don't know if we have more photographs or not coming up. If we do, we'll move on. Yeah, there we do. I'm sorry, I wanted to get that. I knew we had another one in there. That's the floating barge, right?
No, it's a floating dry dock.
Floating dry dock.
ABSD number 2 and number 4. There was 2 of them in our unit, and you see the 10 sections that make that up, and they were
Right.
towed overseas by
Section at a
tugs
time, right.
and assembled and made into one large unit, and it could float the largest battleship afloat or largest ship afloat.
As you can see right there. There's
Within 3 hours.
The battleship at dry dock.
And
it's
that's an
all
LCM
afloat.
that you see going through there, and there's 2 parked off the end of this first section
Right.
right here.
That's just incredible that you can actually make a dry dock that floats in
All
the
right.
water. That's just
Now,
just
another little interesting
Yes,
story
sir.
on those 2 dry docks.
Uh-huh.
They assigned every boat, every night, we had air raid alert. That was just an ongoing thing.
Right.
It didn't happen, but there was always, so one of the boat crews had to be assigned for air raid alert duty in case it happened. Well, this particular night, my boat was air raid boat. And at 5 minutes after midnight, I was called out by the dispatch. It's, go to ABSD number 2. It has been hit by an aerial torpedo. And so we had to go out at midnight. It took us an hour to get there from our base to where those 2 dry docks are assigned. And we got there, and the only time in those islands was about 6 months after we had secured the islands that the Japs had tried to get back. Mm-hmm. And an airplane came in at straight up and down midnight on a moonlight night and dropped an aerial torpedo, dropped it topside. And on ABS number 2, it hit right off of number 3 section, mm-hmm. But it hit outside the wing. And on ABS number 4, it hit on the right by one of the huge gantry cranes that crawls up and down and hauls the heavy equipment aboard the ship. So it hit both docks.
Right.
No casualties, some injuries. There were some work crews sleeping aboard one of the barges where one of them hit outside. On the first one, there were some injuries, but no casualties.
Right, right.
But we had to go out there and just in case. And so that was one of the experiences that we saw, that the only attempt that the Japs had made to get back to the islands is to hit those 2 dry docks.
Right.
And but lucky the dry docks survived it, and the ships in the 2 dry docks were not damaged.
Fred, we're starting to run out of time, and your career after your service was varied. Obviously, you used your mechanical skills to make a living afterwards. But a lot of people in the Brazos Valley know you as Mr. Cash Register. You sold cash registers in the Brazos Valley for years. As a matter of fact, I bought a cash register for you about 15 or 16 years ago myself. But a lot of people know you at that. But before we go away, I want you to talk about a hobby of yours which has really turned into just something incredible, and that's miniature railroad. I had the opportunity to see the miniature railroad you have in the attic of your home, and it's obviously a passion of yours, right?
Well, it became.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I got into the hobby late, and it's a very interesting fact that railroad personnel do not get into the hobby.
Right.
And if they work for the railroad, they're sick of the railroad and they don't want any part of the hobby. So if you'll find anybody working for the hobby mm-hmm. that was
right
into the
there's a matter of fact, while you're talking, I'm showing that's four photographs of what's in your attic, so people can just sort of look at. We don't have really time for you to describe what we have, but but obviously this is a.
Well, I got into it as a retirement for something to do.
Right.
You know, I retired in 1990, but I got into the hobby in 1988.
Right.
Because my business associates and customers were passing away, and I'm reading obituaries and going to funerals and wondering what's happening. And I said, well, they didn't have anything to do, so that's not going to happen to me.
And that gives you something to do. And we're glad that you're doing it, and we're out of time. There's so much more to tell. But thank you for your service, and thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Like Fred Holland does tell us, the bulk of any war is logistics, and landing crafts were one of the main tools of winning the war, both in Europe and in the Pacific. Brave sailors delivering other brave men to the beaches of battle. For his service, Fred Holland was awarded, among other things, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 2 stars. We thank Fred Holland for his service, as we thank all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley. That was good. That was good. I knew when we were talking the other day that I wasn't going to have enough time to tell everything, but I've got the recording of our whole conversation the other day too, so I'm going to get you a copy of that too. So, yeah, you can even hear us over the lawnmower. Okay, yes, the other day.
So we had somebody more in the
area? Yeah. Are we ready? Tell us when we're ready. We're ready? Okay. The motto of Boat Pool 15 in the Pacific Theater of World War II was, "You call, we haul." Delivering soldiers and Marines to the beaches was the job of the landing craft crews, and Fred Holland of the Brazos Valley served as a landing craft mechanical, coxswain, and motor mech for his 2 years of service in the war. I'm Tom Turbeville, inviting you to meet Fred Holland on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.
Very good timing, Tom. Let's do a safety one more time from the top.
Okay. The motto of Boat Pool 15 in the Pacific Theater of World War II was, "You call, we haul." Delivering soldiers, Marines to the beaches was the job of the landing craft crews, and Fred Holland of the Brazos Valley served as a landing craft mechanical coxswain and motormac for 2 years of service in the war. I'm Tom Turbeville, inviting you to meet Fred Holland on Veterans of the Valley, Friday at 8:30, Saturday and Sunday at 6:30, right here on KAMU TV.